I read something pretty depressing yesterday in the FT. It was published by the World Resources Institute that 2022, the amount of deforestation in primary forests increased by 10% in 2022, despite all of the promises and commitments that we would stop deforestation. And it said that every minute 11 football pitches were destroyed. In fact, in 2022, it calculated that the size of Switzerland had been removed in terms of natural primary forest. So in this chat for 10 minutes about inside TNFD, we're going to lose 110 football pitches of forest. You'd have all read the World Wildlife Fund report on nature that said that in our lifetimes, 50 years for me, we've eradicated 69% of all living animals and species in the planet. And before we think this is just something that happens in the Southern Hemisphere or in these protected areas, everyone in this room, if you believe the averages, will produce 80 kilograms of plastic waste this year. That's about my weight of plastic. It'll go into our rivers, our landfills, our oceans. It'll even go into our bloodstreams. So we have an issue. And these natural systems that we're using and resourcing and depleting are not just there for beauty and for preservation, they're a fundamental part of our industrial, our production, our food, our clothing, and our economic systems as well. We know that we are totally dependent on these economic and environmental services for pretty much everything that we do. But this is not just a conversation about conservation, this is a conversation about the financial system. And the financial system that we've all grown up in, I've grown up in, has done us tremendous good in the last 200 years. Building structures, economies, infrastructures, housing, jobs, all of those great things, but it has a flaw at the moment. And that flaw is pretty simple. It gets rewarded for depleting and using resources. It prices the natural assets that they rely on at zero. So imagine if we had a financial system that priced the most important asset class that we have, which is our natural system. Imagine if it priced that not at zero, but took into account the full prices that were there. And that really is the goal of the Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, a task force that is global, that I lead, that has over 1,100 members, a design team representing $20 trillion. How do we take into account natural assets and the dependencies and the impacts that we have, and how do we redirect financial investment away from things that harm nature and into nature-positive outcomes? But we can't be singularly focused on climate. What we know is that Mother Nature invented the planet where climate and nature are integrated together. They're part of the same system. Yet we have teams and programs and task force called Climate Here and Nature Here. We have to think about this in a holistic way. And that's why we, at the TNFD, borrowed, copied, reused the TCFD and created something that is an integrated framework that addresses the issue that climate change can actually only be addressed if we harness Mother Nature, and that in fact a lot of the risks and issues from climate change are impacting the natural system itself. If you read the report from the IPCC, they said very clearly that the contributing factor of changing how we use land, preserve forests, agriculture, food, all of these natural areas would contribute at least a third of all of the reduction of emissions that we need to make by 2030. In fact, they estimated that it would contribute more than 11 times electrifying the entire transportation industry, 11 times. Yet where's the money going? Is the money going into electrification of vehicles, which is great, or is it going into protecting our natural system? We know the answer to that. And the question is, how do we fix it? And people say, well, we really support this, but it's very complicated. Nature is complicated. It's too many metrics. How do you measure it? There's no single target. So this is what we've been doing. We've been breaking down the complexity to make this simpler. So we decode nature. The atmosphere, fresh water, oceans, and earth, and 34 biomes. How do I, as a company or an investor, think about the area of land or water that I'm using and characterize it by the ecosystem services that are very location-specific to nature? This is not like climate. nature is about location. How do I then look at my business and my investments and think about those ecosystem services and dependencies that I have, and how do I decode it? We published this 2 years ago. It's based on science. It's been really well received, and it's now being used in the over 200 pilots that we have around the world on TNFD. And then people say, but it's complicated to do this. How do I go through my portfolio? How do I go through my business and really understand it? We created a methodology. We call it LEAP. Locate, evaluate, assess, prepare. Stepping through the process of looking at my business. Where am I operating, or where is my portfolio? And understanding the specifics of what I'm doing, the dependencies I might have on, say, water or pollination or land use, and the impacts that I might be having, and how those turn into either risks or opportunities. And people, of course, say, well, that's great, but there's not enough data. There's petabytes of data on the natural system. We actually set up a data catalyst. There are more low-orbit satellites monitoring Earth than ever before. We have companies creating digital twins of areas of land. They can tell you the water use. They can model how carbon is being absorbed, how the fertility of the land is changing. We have tools like eDNA, which can look at DNA samples from a river and tell you what's actually happening upstream. There are hundreds of companies, many of which have been doing this for 30 years and many of which 30 months. Are they all joined up and connected? Is it very easy to navigate this? No. But that's part of the missions of the TNFD, to connect this data more easily and make it easier for you to navigate through it. But the excuse that says there's not enough data is really unfounded now. It's not perfect, but it's there, and our pilot testing has proven that you can use it. And then let's talk about targets and metrics. People said to me, what's the 1.5 degree for nature? Well, there isn't a 1.5 degree for nature. It's too complex to do that. But there are a set of targets and there are a set of metrics that the scientists have informed us are the most important to use. We found thousands of metrics on data. There are many out there, but we've boiled this down to 14 essentially. Let's integrate nature and climate, reuse the TCFD. But then let's look at land, freshwater change and use change. Let's look at pollution removal or pollution creation. Let's look at resource replenishment, and then let's translate that into risks and opportunities. So what we're doing at the TNFD, some think it's about disclosures, and yes, disclosures are involved, but really it's about putting the most valuable asset class that the financial system, the planet, and the world has at the heart of the financial system, and trying to make sure that we stop treating it as a free resource, because we're learning it no longer is, trying to ensure we harness all the resources for climate and nature together. These are integrated problems with an integrated solution, and trying to ensure that we redirect financial flows away from those harmful areas into the areas that are more nature positive. Let's hope in a year's time the headline will not be a 10% increase in deforestation and an increase in plastics, but we'll start to see at long last the financial market redirecting capital to start reducing some of those areas. Thank you very much.